We took a $25,000 acquisition and spent about $300,000 in our own work, and 18 months later did a $10 million plus deal with Barrick. Motivated, I've got skin in the game, and I think that for me, the upside of this is certainly not a paycheck. It's the equity position that I have, and I think that keeps us aligned with shareholders to try to do what's best for everybody involved.
Welcome to Crux Investor. First of all, thanks so much for watching this video. If you like it, give us a thumbs up, and of course, do leave us your comments below. It helps us understand the sorts of questions you'd like us to be asking companies, how you think we're doing generally, and of course, what you think of the company. And if you haven't already done so, please click the button in the corner of the screen to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, for more videos like this, please click the notification bell. We spoke to Jeff Wilson, who's the CEO of Precipitate Gold. They're a TSX listed company with assets in the Dominican Republic. Three to be precise. First is Juan de Herrera, which has been parked up for now because of some licensing issues. Second is Pueblo Grande, where they've just done an earn-in agreement with Barrick. Barrick have agreed to spend $10 million over the next 6 years, all things being equal, and have handed over $1.4 million of cash to the company. That could be particularly interesting, especially as Barrick have agreed to put in place the funding for the 30% carry for the company. The third asset is Ponton, which is sort of about 40 kilometers away from Pueblo Grande. Early stage exploration on that. We'll work out, how they tend to develop that and what they tend to do, possibly replicate what they've done with Barrick. Lots of other things discussed, especially about doing business in the country. Take a look in the description below at all of the topics, and you can click on the number beside each topic. That is a timestamp, and that will leap you to that part of the video. But enjoy what Jeff has to say. Hey Jeff, how you doing, sir?
Doing very well, thanks.
Thanks for joining us. Where are you today?
I'm in Vancouver, BC, here in Canada.
Very nice.
Starting my day here.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us so early. Appreciate it. What's the weather like there?
It's been beautiful. We've had a little bit of rain here and there, typically overnight, but it's been an unusually warm and sunny spring so far. So, while we're all sort of, contained within our homes, it's kind of nice to see the sun shining and to get some time in and around the yard, I guess. So
yeah,
nice.
I know. It's the same here actually. So it's really nice at the moment. But this is a news story to us. You've not been on the show before. I always, like to get to know the people first before we kind of get into the weeds, as it were. So thanks for joining us. Can you give us a 1-minute overview of the business first, and then we'll kind of get into it?
Sure. So Precipitate is a junior gold exploration company trading on the TSX Venture. We are really focused on the early stage, or sort of the discovery stage of the business. Our mandate has always been to go after highly prospective ground in jurisdictions where we think there's, mining-friendly jurisdictions where there's good geology that maybe for one reason or another has been underexplored. And so in 2012, we saw a grand opportunity in the Dominican Republic on the back of a big discovery that was made there in 2012 by a company called Gold Quest, who had a share price go from 6 cents to $2 nearly overnight in 2012. And we staked a significant amount of ground adjacent to that project at that time. Had various levels of success and still hold that ground now. And since then have sort of developed what we think is a very prospective portfolio of projects within the Dominican Republic. So it's a fairly perhaps little known or not highly active jurisdiction, but great geology, and one of the biggest mining operations in the world, operated by Barrick and Newmont in a joint venture, is hosted there in the Dominican Republic.
Beautiful.
So we think it's it's got fantastic mineral endowment and lots of upside potential. So that's why we're there.
Okay, that's a great intro to the business. So let me start with, why are you in the Dominican Republic? People usually go to what they know, where they train, who they know. You've kind of said, well, I assume it was a bit more than neurology when you looked at Gold Quest's deal. Was it because you looked at their share price rocketed up and you thought, well, maybe we could replicate that by staking nearby? It's got to be more than neurology. Why are you in the Dominican Republic?
Yeah, it is. And again, we're not about being a real estate play here. So as much as I think there's some value in being in the right neighborhood, so to speak, geologically, more importantly to us, rather than closeology, it has to have the right geology. And so when we looked at where Gold Quest made the discovery and looked at some of the surrounding area, we recognized that it was the same geological terrain. The opportunity that arose there was, in any other jurisdiction, a company like Gold Quest, prior to making that announcement, likely would have blanket staked as far as the eye could see to protect themselves so that they had every other piece of prospective ground. In the Dominican Republic, we recognized that there was a policy whereby any one company can only hold up to 30,000 hectares. And so Gold Quest, at the time of their discovery, was maxed out on their land package or their land position. So they could not acquire any additional ground within that same prospective geological belt. And that, for us, represented the opportunity. We were able to stake right up against their concession boundary along about a 40-kilometer strike. We picked up about 10,000 hectares at that time. And again, what we saw there was very, high level, helicopter view was it was the right geological environment. It had never had so much as a grab sample done at the time. So it was a very, very early stage land package. But we saw the right characteristics and knew that it was potential there to find some of the same sorts of mineralization as had been identified by Gold Quest.
So had you worked in the country before?
We had not. Prior to that, we had not worked in the country. We at the time, the company had very recently listed on Yukon and British Columbia assets that were very early stage, but through an associate that we had who was resident in the Dominican Republic at the time, we were able to sort of jump to the front of the queue, if you will, and get that ground staked ahead of anybody else. And suddenly we were positioned in the DR.
And so what is that property today? I mean, are we able to monetize it? Has any book value today to you?
Yeah, so we've had varying degrees of work that's been done there. In fact, we've had quite a bit of sort of property-wide work. Again, in the lean years from 2012 to today, there were quite a few of them, where access to capital was challenging and being able to advance projects was tough. What we did was we did a lot of just, good old-fashioned boots on the ground geological and exploration work. So we did an extensive amount of soil and rock sampling throughout the property package to delineate areas of interest. We then ran geophysics, which was a real tool for Gold Quest in their discovery, because there's not a lot of outcrop in that particular belt. And so really geophysics, seeing what was happening below the surface, was really critical. So we did quite an extensive amount of geophysics on the project. And then in 2014 and 16, we did a couple of rounds of drilling where we had a discovery in 2014 at an area that we call Ginger Ridge within our Juan de Herrera package, and then subsequently delineated several other what I would call high priority targets where we're seeing that correlation of geology, geochemistry, and geophysics all sort of lining up in quite significant areas. So it's a property that has a great number of targets delineated within it. We've actually got drill permits for up to 100 different drill pads on that project. But it's an area that we've sort of, as a bit of a sidebar here, we've taken a little bit of a break from that area because in the last several years, Gold Quest has been in a bit of a holding pattern while they're awaiting an exploitation permit. And so while they've been waiting for that permit, the view from the market was, create a little uncertainty geopolitically and politically. So what we wanted to see was, look, let's not continue to spend money in a specific area of the country where the guys who've already found gold are having a bit of a bureaucratic problem getting it out. And so we thought, better opportunity was to go to another part of the country where mining is a little bit more known.
Right.
But so Juan de Herrera remains there as a follow-up project for us, and we're starting to see some daylight there in the last couple of months.
Okay, but let's just kind of stay with Juan de Herrera, because I just want to be able to park it, right? So what is and it comes back to business plan, business strategy, etc. So what were you thinking there? Were you thinking, hey, if we kind of work this up enough, we might be able to flip it to like Gold Quest or someone else? I mean, because it comes back to the way you described yourself at the beginning. You were a kind of exploration would be, well, how would you describe yourself actually?
What we're trying to do, and this speaks to what I think where you're going with the question, is what we're trying to do is to be sort of an early exploration focused company that can identify mineralization that we know the mid-tier and the majors want. So we're not necessarily looking to become the next junior miner. I think what we're looking for is to make a discovery that would be attractive to a mid-tier or a major company.
So is that a project generator by another name?
No, not really. I mean, I think a project generator would be more inclined to sort of identify projects quite early on, and before spending much or any of their own money, try to find a partner in a joint venture or something like that. I think for us, we're a little bit more swing for the fences, try to hit the home run on the discovery end of things. And so we're more inclined to acquire projects and spend our own money to try to make a significant discovery and get that market reward. Not unlike we saw with Gold Quest when they made an announcement of a drill discovery, and share price goes.
Okay, so how do you monetize Juan de Herrera then?
Yeah, so Juan de Herrera has, I mean, there's lots of potential there. I mean, at the time that we were more active there, Gold Quest was several $100 million market cap company and advancing toward development and production. Along the way, and this is where I think things get interesting for us, Agnico Eagle came in and put about $24 million into Gold Quest in an equity financing. This is going back maybe 2 or 3 years ago now. And the view there was that Agnico was seeing, at the time, I think it was about a 2.5-3 million ounce deposit in a 43-101 compliant resource that Gold Quest had advanced. And it was moving toward, as I said, that exploitation permit. And I think Agnico saw that as a potential position where they wanted to be in, perhaps as a possible joint venture or takeover. So we started to see our ground as an important or integral part of that total regional land package. And so if a major were to come in and say to Gold Quest, thank you very much, we see multi-million ounce deposit here and we think that there's exploration potential for more, we would see Juan de Herrera as being an integral part of that sort of ongoing process.
Got it. So let's deal with one of the other things you just talked about there. Was they are having problems around their exploitation licenses. So they know what they've got under the ground, or they know partially what they've got under the ground, but they can't get it out of the ground. Is that a common throughout the Dominican Republic, or is that just regional or state led?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's part of the reason why we're still there and committed to the Dominican Republic is we do think that it's a very specific issue. It's quite political in this particular case. So, at the base of it all, this Romero project of Gold Quest and our Juan de Herrera are in an area of the country that is not does not have existing mining operations. So you're talking about sort of breaking new ground when you're talking about going into an area that doesn't have a history of mining and talking about construction of a mine. And I don't care whether you're building a pipeline in Canada or a mine in parts of the Dominican Republic. You're going to have to go through the necessary CSR and politics in order to get it done. And I think that what we're seeing with Gold Quest is working its way through that issue. It's a largely agricultural part of the country, so again, it's an area where the locals haven't really had any direct contact with mining in the past. But I think there's an opportunity here to bring about some quite important economic growth and gain in an area that's otherwise pretty impoverished. The other part of it is, it gets really quite political. The president of the country is actually from that part of the Dominican Republic, and the Gold Quest permit has gone through the mining department, check box, the mines ministry, check the boxes, and then the process in the DR is it lands then on the president's desk. And he has been trying to run for re-election over the course of the last several years and trying to remain as popular as possible in order to improve his odds of being re-elected. Well, in the last 6 months or so, he's decided not to run. And so I think that political conflict of a president who comes from that community that's largely an agricultural community, and there may be some pushback, while he's trying to remain as popular as possible, didn't want to sign anything that might be a contentious issue with the country. And so I think what we're going to see here is there's an election due this summer. There'll be a new president put in place who, looking at the candidates that are there now, no one is from that community or has any direct ties to that community. And I think what they'll do is they'll come into power and they'll say, first of all, there's an opportunity here to increase the economic buoyancy of this part of the country. We can generate jobs, we can generate taxes. And I think equally importantly right now is that the country is so heavily reliant upon tourism that and the COVID issues that we're dealing with now, I think you're going to see a government that's going to look at mining as a lifeline coming out of this COVID issue. And I think mining and that Romero project of Gold Quest has a very good opportunity to start to see some daylight. And that whole
we hear that a lot. We hear that a lot. That's the hope. And you're talking very specifically and at length with regards to what's happening at national level. But these surely come down to ESG type activities at a local level. You've got to win over the locals. So do you think that was a big part of what Gold Quest had failed to do? And for that matter, I don't know how active Agnico Eagle were as part of that. Because we again, when we're talking about South American countries and places like Ecuador and so forth, these are very important social measures that need to be considered at a local level. Even despite what the state says, the federal government says.
Yeah, no, and I think in this case we've been fortunate in that we haven't seen. Certainly for the sake of Gold Quest or even for ourselves, we don't see the sorts of things where you see, blockades across the roads or protests in the street. It really hasn't been so much of a community sort of uproar. It really has been this very political issue where, this permit sort of, due to the processes that there are in the DR, it lands on the president's desk. I mean, the president really doesn't have any greater level of knowledge than the mines department and the mines ministry, who have all already signed off on it. But again, when it lands on his desk, it just becomes this political, symbolic sort of issue where he signs it or he doesn't. And I think we're not seeing people in the local communities opposed to this to any grand extent. And quite frankly, when we started to sort of slow down our operations there and move to another part of the country, not surprisingly, we were inundated with locals who were asking when we were coming back because, they enjoyed the work and the income that even at a low level with the kind of work that we were doing, which is getting guys in the field and taking samples and, that kind of thing, cutting pathways and things like that.
Okay.
So the locals seem to be very on site.
That's good news. And so that is a holding pattern for you. So the original question was, are you assigning any value to that today? You're a 15 million market cap Canadian dollar market cap company. Are you assigning any value to Juan de Herrera, or is that something that you'll be able to monetize or really create some value for later down the line once this situation of Gold Quest is cleared up?
I think that we have not garnered much in the way of value from it over the course of the last couple of years because of this sort of political or regional uncertainty. I think that we are starting to see some recognition for the targets that we delineated there. So I think very little value, having said that. And, at the time that we shifted from that project to other assets in the country, we did so because we really weren't getting much value for that. And as a junior exploration company, you've got to move forward and add value for your shareholders.
Absolutely. Name of the game. So let's move on to that. So thanks for dealing with that one. I think we can park that now. So Pueblo Grande, you've struck a deal with Barrick. Do you want to tell the guys and gals what that deal structure looks like?
Sure. So we signed a deal in late April with Barrick, whereby Barrick has agreed to an earn-in agreement. It's not a joint venture, it's an earn-in agreement whereby Barrick has committed to spend $10 million US, which is nearly $14 million Canadian right now, over 6 years, to bring the project to a pre-feasibility stage. In doing so, if they do that over the course of 6 years, they spend $10 million US and get us a pre-feasibility or the project pre-feasibility stage, they'll earn a 70% interest in the project. We're quite happy with that deal in terms of those dollar figures because dollars go a long way in the Dominican Republic. So to spend $10 million US in 6 years is no small task. But I think more importantly, often in a case like this where a major company comes in, there will be some clause in the agreement whereby they can spend sort of a partial spend to get to 51%. And then the major company kind of has control. They have the hammer and maybe things take longer than they should. And they can sort of decide whether they want to increase that position. We fought hard to ensure that this was sort of an all or nothing deal with Barrick. And so look, if you want to earn an interest in this project, you've got to be serious. You've got to spend a significant amount of money, do a significant amount of drilling. And more importantly, get this to a pre-feasibility stage to earn that 70%. So they earn nothing until they've committed those dollars and delivered that spend. And the other part that I was really pleased with in this agreement is Again, often the major says, okay, great, we'll produce a pre-feasibility and we will Cadillac and Rolls-Royce this report to death, so that the capital cost is enormous and your 30% precipitate is going to be impossible for you to come up with. The terms of this agreement call for Barrick to arrange our 30% of the project financing. And so again, that allows us not to be unduly diluted out of the agreement or out of the deal if there's some success here. So we think it's a good deal for us. This is a big property package, lots of targets. And to see the kinds of dollars that they've committed to spend, should tell the market, certainly told me, that look, this is a big area that's going to require a lot of work and a big budget, and that's the kind of thing that major companies are better at, and have the capacity for more so than we do.
I liked the way you structured it. I liked a lot about the way you structured it. I was surprised that you didn't increase the minimum number of meters to be drilled. I mean, so it was 7,500 meters. Why did you end up on that number?
Yeah, well, I can speak to that. We tried to push harder with Barrick on a couple of different fronts. Ultimately, what they said to us, and I agree, is that, look, Jeff, the reality here is we cannot get to a pre-feasibility stage by drilling 7,500 meters of drilling. We will drill tens of thousands of meters of drilling in order to get to that pre-feas. So to some extent, the dollar amount, the minimum drill commitment are sort of, I don't want to say they're fluff, but at the end of the day, what people really need to focus in on is they've got to produce a pre-feasibility study. And if anybody knows the kind of work and time and effort that goes into a pre-feas, they'll know Barrick is going to do a significant amount of drilling and spend a significant amount of money, perhaps more than the 10 million minimum, in order to deliver that pre-feas.
So help people understand here how you go about constructing a deal like that. So you talk about a minimum 10 million. It's a minimum. It's not 10 million, it's a minimum of 10 million. And they'll work out whether it needs to be 10, 15, or 20. And they'll work out whether it needs to be 7,500 meters or 17,500 meters, right? But how does it affect your 30% interest, just presuming they do the full 6-year term?
How does it affect it? Well, basically, they spend that money, they earn their 70%, we have 30. We don't have to contribute any finances along the way to that spend, and whether they spend more doesn't generate them any more interest. What they can do is they can expedite their expenditures. So if they wanted to spend all 10 million tomorrow, they can do that, and that would get them their 70% interest sooner. But they've got to commit to spending that money, and more importantly, delivering a pre-feas. And a pre-feas cannot be done overnight.
Right. I understand that, but it's a great deal for you if they end up spending 20 million and they know a lot more about this, because they got a lot more data to work with, right? So I just wondered if that affected in any way the terms of your agreement with them.
No, I mean, there's a minimum spend. Again, due to COVID, we altered the terms a little bit midway through negotiations. So originally we were going to have a $1 million minimum expenditure in year one. As we got closer to signing the definitive, we agreed that, look, year one is a great uncertainty with respect to COVID and when people will actually be able to get on the ground and do work. So we pushed that, and we combined year one and year two. Mm-hmm. Into a minimum $2 million in the first 2 years. So I think to spend $2 million in the first 2 years here is a significant spend. Again, that's US dollars. So for us, we talk often here in Vancouver about Canadian dollars, and what we would spend, what we would raise is all in Canadian currency. You're talking about a significant budget here at $2 million over 2 years. The other thing is Barrick is right there. So Barrick's Pueblo Viejo mining operation is in sort of the core of this region. And so they have not only do they have a great understanding, I think, and perhaps even better than our own, of the geology of this region, their expenditures are going to be, it's going to be tough for them to spend that money because they're already there. They've got personnel there. They've got equipment there. And so, when you're basically, exploring next door, it's not as expensive, or you don't go through as much money as if you're flying people in from one part of the world to another to work a brand new project. So, we're quite excited about what we've been able to structure here. And I think it puts their feet to the fire a little bit here to be serious. And not the least of which is, I think, again, there are people who say, well, you bring in a major and they're going to act slowly and they're going to take their time and you're not going to have any news flow, and that's fine. We've brought in some language in the agreement whereby they've got to give us quarterly reports and they've got to give us any notice and reports on any proposed programs, that sort of thing. But I think most importantly here is the one thing that Mark Bristow at Barrick has stated in a number of different press releases is that some of their best exploration work over the last few years has been from brownfields work surrounding their current operations. And so they see, I think, great opportunity to replenish their supply in and around some of their tier one assets by exploring around those assets. And I guess to get to my point, I think that it's highly unlikely that Barrick will leave any stone unturned here in this property package and try to just, sort of take a close, well, we spent $1 million, we don't see what we like, we're going to walk. Because if somebody else finds something in the ground surrounding one of their top assets that they passed on or overlooked, they would certainly have a little bit of egg on their face. So I think that they're going to do a systematic and full exploration sort of project over this entire program.
Just remind people about the size and scale of the Barrick operation. They've got Pueblo Viejo next, close by. So it is a sizable operation, as you say, but just for people again new to this, give people a sense of the size of the operation.
Yeah, so Pueblo Viejo, Barrick's operation, is it's got to be one of the top 5 mining operations in the world, depending on how you calculate it. It's certainly one of the biggest in Latin America. Barrick has sunk about $4.5 billion into infrastructure there. They're proposing to spend another $1 billion in expansion and growth in the coming years. A couple of years ago, this project was producing 1 million ounces a year, gold equivalent. It's now down around 600,000 ounces per year. It is world class, and certainly, like I say, one of Barrick's top tier 1 assets. So it's a monster. It's the single largest economic driver in the Dominican Republic. So when you talk about taxes and royalties and how that contributes to the economy in the DR, it is number 1 above all else. And so Barrick and the Pueblo Viejo mining operation are essential and critical to the country, the DR. So this is kind of counter to what we were saying about, the Juan de Herrera, although we parked that in terms of politics and sort of the jurisdiction. Yes, you have a region or regions where maybe mining isn't as familiar to people, but there is no question that in the Dominican Republic, mining and that Pueblo Viejo mining operation of Barrick's is paramount.
Fantastic. They've spent $4.5 billion. How much have you spent to date since you've been in country?
In country, I guess we've probably spent under $5 million. I would say we've probably in total we've probably spent about maybe $3 to $4 million, somewhere in that range.
Okay.
We haven't done as much drilling as we would have liked, and some of that was during some of those lean years where access to capital was difficult. We were doing more sort of grassroots on the ground work. But I think that to see when you compare that, comparatively speaking, what we've spent over the course of 8 years compared to what Barrick is proposing to spend on this project in 6 years, it's a compelling number.
So your costs are low. I was just looking at the team because there's a real mixture of finance guys and geologists. So you're more from finance background. So right. Who are the geologists on this? Who are the active geologists on this? Who's the technical team telling you where to spend your money?
Yeah, so the primary focus there, the point man, is Michael Moore, and Michael is the vice president of exploration for the company. Mike's full-time committed 100% to Precipitate, and is really he and I who are sort of the management team, if you will. Most other aspects of the business are sort of outsourced or contracted. And so Mike speaks Spanish. Yes, as we said at the beginning, we hadn't been in the Dominican Republic specifically before, but Mike's worked in a lot of Latin American countries in the past, been a contract geologist working all over the world. And so he was, or is, the person responsible for some of the initial discoveries that we had at our Juan de Herrera project. Again, as I said, this was a land package that hadn't seen so much as a grab sample when we got there. And we were very quickly, able to bring that to a discovery stage inside of a couple of years. And so credit to Mike on that. From the board level, we get a lot of input from our technical geological team at the board level. Dr. Quinton Henning is a member of the board. Quinton is quite well renowned in the industry over the course of the last few years for some of his successes and a number of other juniors that he's now involved with, including Lion One and Noble Resources and others. So Quinton provides for us a great technical expertise in terms of delineating targets and identifying where we want to be and where we don't. Another critical member of the technical team at a board level is Alistair Waddell. Now, Alistair, interestingly enough, Alistair was an original member of the Gold Quest founding team. So he's a geologist, but he was part of the reason why Gold Quest entered into the Dominican Republic in the first place. He left Gold Quest. He was the CEO of Gold Quest. He left Gold Quest and he was working in a senior position at Kinross for about 6 years, looking at projects all over the world, and then joined our board, I guess about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And again, brings a great level of expertise with respect to the region, the country, the geology, what parts of the country do we think are prospective. And again, in transitioning from Juan de Herrera to Pueblo Grande, Alistair was paramount in that. He was an advocate of this area that, yes, it was held by someone else at the time, but he believed that it was prospective and that there were some targets there that he'd looked at years ago that hadn't really been tested properly. And he really pounded the table with me to go after acquiring the Pueblo Grande Project, and we've seen how that's worked out over the course of the last few months. Adrian Fleming's the chairman. Adrian also is a geologist. Adrian cut his teeth with Placer, was involved with a number of juniors here in Vancouver. Some of the successes include Underworld, which again follows the sort of the model that we're working on here, which is go in, identify a project, advance it to a point where the mid-tiers or the majors have to have it. Underworld was bought out by Kinross for about $140 million a few years ago. And then he was a founding director of Northern Empire, which has recently been bought out by Coeur. So, the team on the technical side are all very savvy, experienced geologists. They also understand the junior sector. So it's one thing to have a bunch of really smart guys who have only worked for majors their whole lives, have a different understanding of budgets and the capital markets. I think this team understands, the capital markets as well as anyone as well. And lastly, to mention him, Lon Shaver is a former investment banker, was at Raymond James for about 10 years, is now vice president over at Silvercorp, and someone I'd worked with many years ago in the mining sector, and just brings a great sort of capital markets and deal structuring capacity to the team.
So those are people you can rely on, but it's Michael Moore and yourself, are they kind of full-time guys on this? Is that right? Because everyone else is sitting on various boards there, right? They've got a lot of different things going on, but it's you and Michael driving this. Yep,
correct. Yeah, and we've got some advisory people in the Dominican Republic. I think one interesting note is a gentleman by the name of Mexico Angeles Lithgow is a Dominican national, resident in Santo Domingo. He's joined us as an advisor to the board, but Mexico was the previous president and executive director of Barrick's Pueblo Viejo mining operation. So this is a guy who very well connected in the business and political world in the DR, and gives us really good guidance.
Fantastic.
Not only about the area that we're working, but certainly in-country knowledge and expertise.
Fantastic. So how many shares are you and Michael sitting on? I mean, have you invested a lot of time and effort? You've been here a long time. This is your only gig, is that right? Or have you got other projects?
I'm involved as a director of one other company or two other companies, but this is my primary focus.
This is your primary focus. So how much have you invested into this company?
In terms of dollars, it's difficult to say, but I'm between my wife and I think we're sitting on about 2 million shares. Michael, I think, is in a similar position. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think between he and his wife. I mean, I am not a founder of the company. Interestingly enough, I was approached by the founders of the company at the onset, and as I mentioned previously, the company was established with projects in northern British Columbia and Yukon, and at the time the company was getting ready to go public and seed stock, et cetera, was being doled out. I passed on the opportunity. They approached me to come in and run the company, and I decided to stick with what I was doing. When they acquired the project in the DR next to Gold Quest, that caught my attention. And interestingly enough, or coincidentally enough, they came back to me at that time and said, look, it's not working out with the person that we've brought on as president. Would you reconsider? And so that was when I entered into the fold. And at that time, the stock was north of 20 cents. But the first thing I said was, like, if I'm going to run a company, I don't want to do this for a paycheck. I've got to have a vested interest in this. So, the founders and the company are going to need to make, at least a $1 million starting position available to me. And so I acquired that position as I took the role of president and CEO back in late 2012, early 2013. And so, I can say that I've got and I've participated in every financing since. Been buying, I've bought here and there in the market. But I can say that my average cost is probably somewhere higher than where the stock is trading today. So I'm motivated. I've got skin in the game. And I think that for me, the upside of this is certainly not a paycheck. It's the equity position that I have. And I think that keeps us aligned with shareholders to try to do what's best for everybody involved.
Always aligned with shareholders. Got to be, right? So let's talk about your third project, Ponton. I don't know how to pronounce it. How do you pronounce it?
No, that's it, Ponton. Yep.
Ponton, there you go, like a native. That's obviously very early stage, but it's the next early stage exploration project that you're looking at. What are you hoping to try to do with that? Is it replicate what you've been able to do with Pueblo Grande, or have you got other plans?
Yeah, I think that I do like to mention that I think that what happened with Pueblo Grande, I think, is a validation of what we are setting out to do, which is to find early stage assets or projects that have the right characteristics to host meaningful mineralization and try to advance them to the point where they can be attractive to majors. It worked out very well in the case of Pueblo Grande. Inside of about 18 to 24 months, we took a $25,000 acquisition and spent about $300,000 in our own work. And 18 months later, did a $10 million plus deal with Barrick. Ponton, interestingly enough, as we got fairly advanced in our negotiations with Barrick about Pueblo Grande. And for those who don't know, Ponton is a satellite. It's about 25 kilometers removed to the east from the Pueblo Grande land package. And Pueblo Grande sits right up against the claim boundary of Barrick. Ponton does not. It's a little bit removed, but it's in the same geological terrain that cuts across the country. When we were sort of advanced in our negotiations with Barrick, interestingly enough, they said, okay, we kind of had a bit of a gentleman's agreement about what the terms were going to be. They said, oh, by the way, we sort of forgot to mention, but we'd like to include that Ponton project in this earn-in deal. And I went back to my geological team and I went back to Michael and I said, what do you think about this? And he said, absolutely not. We want to keep this. I know why Barrick wants it. And we should keep this because we are not a project generator. And so my MO is not to get up in the morning and hand off projects to other companies tomorrow. It's to try to, find something where we can make a discovery. And so we knew when we were doing the deal or finalizing the deal with Barrick, we had to have a next chapter for ourselves in terms of what we were going to spend our own capital and time on. And so Ponton immediately was that. Now, when we picked up Ponton, at the time we acquired this land package, look, the market, our shareholders, everybody was focused and affixed on the sort of the sex appeal of Pueblo Grande being next to one of the biggest mines in the world. And so that was sort of the driver for the value of the company. And so last December, Michael Moore went down to the projects to sort of do a final target delineation for drilling. And they had some time one day and they drove over to Ponton as a bit of a, let's just see what's going on over here. And he came back and he said to me in December of last year, I really like this Ponton project. I think we should spend a little more time there. I said, look, Mike, we need to stay focused on Pueblo Grande. That's where that's the prize here right now. Let's not get distracted. But when we knew that Pueblo Grande was going to go into the hands of Barrick, we revisited that. And we quickly realized that when we went through some of the data, not only, yes, it was early stage, but there actually were some targets here that had been, in our mind, overlooked, certainly by ourselves, but also by prior operators. There has been some geophysical work done, some geochemical work done, and some prior drilling here. So it's early stage, and it's kind of the next leg for us in terms of what we intend to go after. But it's more advanced than a total greenfields prospect where we're trying to figure things out.
What type of geophysics was done on it?
There was magnetics done on the project and IP. And where we see the opportunity here is that the target that's emerging for us now is a geochemical target where there really hasn't been much geophysics on this particular target. But it's a multi-element, there's gold and silver and copper and all the right sort of epithermal style mineralization elements at surface in this fairly large, a kilometer by 2 kilometer kind of target area. But no geophysics over that. So that will be part of our first phase of work here, is to go in and do some follow-up geochem, but then run some lines of magnetics over that. It's called the Cope Hill is what we call the target area. And we see that as being a relatively near-term drillable target, potentially in the next few months.
Have you got enough cash?
Yeah, so one of the things we didn't mention about the Barrick transaction was, along with the earn-in commitment, there's also $1 million US in a private placement, which again amounted to about just under $1.4 million Canadian. So at the time we did the deal, we had about $1 million. So that put us, right about now, we're probably about $2.3 million in the treasury. All the properties are owned 100%, so we don't have underlying vendor obligations where we've got to make stage payments. We fulfilled all the payment and acquisition obligations. We don't have work commitments where you got to spend $200,000 in year 1 or 2. These things, our treasury is fully discretionary, and our G&A and our overhead, as we talked about, it's really just Michael Moore and I who are sort of the hands-on management of the company, and so our G&A is pretty light, and so that $2.3 million I think will get us a long way. And perhaps one thing to note is, earlier this year, we completed the acquisition of drilling equipment, and so
I was going to ask
it wasn't
you about
necessarily
that. Why did you do that?
It was not the plan, and I'm often skeptical of junior companies who buy. I get skeptical of junior companies that buy their own drilling equipment or run their own drilling equipment, because it sometimes can be a cash drain because you're not a driller and you do things wrong, and it becomes problematic. In this case, we were about to go drilling or prepping up to go drilling at Pueblo Grande before the Barrick deal emerged. And we spoke to the drill contractors that we had used multiple times in the DR, and they had equipment in country, and discovered that they had gone bankrupt. And so we had a couple of different options. We go with a different contractor. Okay, there's nobody else in country. That would take time. That would cost more money. They'd have to figure things out. Okay, that's one plan. Or, we look at how we get our hands on, securing that equipment that was in country, down the road. You don't have to worry about clearing customs. And because it was all very recently owned by another company, all the crew and the personnel were still there, sort of desperately hoping to have jobs back. And so we were able to go identify the receiver. And I don't know for sure what the numbers would be, but let's say round numbers, this was $800,000 worth of equipment. It was up to 5 drill rigs, man-mobilized small drill rigs. We went to the receivers and we secured the entire inventory for $80,000.
Wow!
What we did was, to mitigate costs, we engaged our friends at Gold Quest and came to an arrangement whereby we bought the stuff jointly. So our out-of-pocket cost to get what amount to about $800,000 worth of drill equipment was $40,000. And what we also did was we secured a couple of the foremen and key personnel to work with us on a contract basis. So again, we're not paying them every day, all the time on salary. Again, we'll pay them for the hours that they work. So what that gives us is a significantly reduced drill cost per meter. We can get a lot more done with the treasury that we have. And perhaps more importantly for me is, whenever you engage a drill contractor, the clock starts the minute they show up. And so you're constantly trying to get a drill hole completed and get the drill remobilized to the next location as quickly as possible, sequentially, boom, 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 get the drill off the site as quick as you can so the clock stops ticking. And then you send all your stuff to the lab and you see what you've got. And there's a lot of instances when that happens and you could say, geez, I wish we would have known that while the drill was still here, because we might have done the second hole or the third hole a little differently. Because we own this rig or these rigs, we'll be able to do that. We'll be able to drill a hole or two, send everybody home, go see send the crew home to see their wives, and leave the drill there. And we're not paying for that downtime. And to be able to scratch your head a little bit and think about what you're seeing that's coming out of the drill bit.
Why do you keep using the phrase? Why do you use the phrase up to 5-man portable drill rig? You said it, and it's also in your PowerPoint. What does that mean, up to? Did you buy 5 or not?
So
5?
it was a Yes, it was a bit of a big warehouse mess when we acquired it. So there were components and parts there sufficient to build 5 drill rigs.
Excellent. Or
Some of that
got it.
equipment was a little shoddy, and so what we decided to do was, so I clarify
You have
again.
spares. You have
We
spares
have the
now, right?
have spares, but
Got
what we
it.
decided to do instead was to sort of high grade, if you will, one quality rig. I mean, at present we only need one rig, and when we're finished and Gold Quest needs a rig, there's a rig there. So there's the capacity to with a little additional capital, we could improve and get a second or a third rig operational. But what we elected to do was let's get one fully
Make a good one.
functional, sort of
Yeah.
top of the class, and that's what we've done. So yeah, that's the clarification on that.
Got it. Nice little project. I mean, I think Dominican Republic's a great place. Highly prospective. Some big names there already. And team getting to an earning agreement with Barrick. I mean, well done. Congratulations. I hope that works out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nice for us to have a project advancing on somebody else's dime, and I think has that potential to be a real prize, even at a 30% remaining interest. If it's something significant enough for Barrick in that neighborhood, I think that our 30% will be certainly value add. And while that's happening, the ability to deploy this capital that we've got now on projects that I think are highly prospective, perhaps have better geological targets than even the Pueblo Grande, but maybe just don't have the sex appeal of the location. But and so we're excited as we start to feel like we're entering back into a gold market here, to be able to go after some highly prospective targets and have the technical expertise and the capital to go do them well.
Do you think your company has the sex appeal to attract new investors? I mean, what do you think they should be buying into?
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a transition over the last couple of months since announcing the transaction. Admittedly, some people, were fully in for the swing for the fences, step up to the plate and try to hit a home run and drill Pueblo Grande ourselves. And so when we announced the deal, not surprisingly, there was a bit of a transition, but certainly there were a greater number of people, in my opinion, and that you can see that in the forward movement of the share price at the time or subsequent to the announcement. I think there were more people that saw value in the validation that comes with a company like Barrick, sort of giving the stamp of approval on what you've identified, and I think allows for that investor base to say, okay, if you've identified something that's attractive to Barrick before, and here are the projects that you think are worth keeping yourselves, we're interested in getting behind that and supporting the first phases of work on that.
So you think you can replicate that with, from what I'm hearing today, you think you can potentially replicate Pueblo Grande at Ponton for Barrick? Obviously, it's the natural player, given what they know about the region. If you can do that, do you think the market gets excited? And then what?
Yeah, I mean, I do think. I mean, to say that we can replicate it, I mean, I don't know. I don't have the capacity to see, the future and what's going to happen. But I think that, we were. We based our decision on keeping that project for ourselves on the merit of the geological potential. So we think there is a target at Ponton that is untested, has all the right sort of earmarks for what could be sizable epithermal style mineralization. So that's kind of our company MO, is to go after these things. It would be a very relatively inexpensive exercise to get that drill ready and drilled. And Barrick has, without question, over the course of the last 12 months or so, shown a really strong renewal of interest in exploration and growth. I think you see that in the deal that we've struck with them. But again, they've also picked up some relatively small but claim blocks elsewhere in that same geological belt, not far from Ponton in some cases. So again, I think that finding something that resonates with them, I don't think it's out of the question that they would come back and want to have a conversation about that. And then similarly, at our Juan de Herrera, and a great number of very advanced targets there, geochemical work, geophysical work, sampling, mapping, all have been done. permits in place on that project on a lot of the targets themselves. And so at such time as we feel as if the return on investment in going back into that part of the country is justified, and that there's clarity and transparency, again, I think there's a number of targets there that we could get up and running and testing in a short amount of time.
Perfect. Jeff, great summary. Stay in touch with us. Let us know how you get on with some of these things. And I know you've been quite careful with the money and cautious about how you move forward, but we would be delighted to get any updates as and when you get them, okay?
Great. Well, thanks a lot for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure.